Hi, my name is Terry. I have 3 college degrees, including a master's degree from an Ivy League university. I'm fluent in 2 languages, and I have a commercial driver's license, which allows me to operate heavy trucks, and I still can't find a job. My girlfriend's been working at a fast food restaurant for the last 9 years, but what she really wants to do is be an elementary school teacher. So every day I'm going to be coming on here and telling you guys stories of things that I think are cool or interesting, and then I'm going to teach you a little bit of Spanish until I can earn enough money to send my girl to teaching school. So, today we're going to be talking about Pablo Picasso. Pictured behind me is the earliest known work from Picasso. It's called Hercules with His Club. Now there are a couple of problems with this piece, and I want to see if you can identify them. First, the limbs are out of scale. Second, his left thigh is thicker than his right, and his left arm is also anatomically incorrect. In addition to that, repeated breaking of the lines means that the artist is starting and stopping multiple times throughout the sketch, which is a sign of uncertainty that is indicative of an inexperienced hand. But despite this piece is remarkable. Why? Because Picasso was only 9 years old when it was created. So his father recognized his talent immediately and nurtured it. He was enrolled in art school by the time he was 11 years old, and at just 14 he was admitted into the Art Academy of Barcelona. The next year he had a large canvas shown at a public exhibition of his work, The First Communion. Now, Picasso is unique in the sense that very few people leave such an expansive record of their early works when they were a child, and very few people produce such a high quality of work at such a young age. But his family preserved his work even when he was a child because they recognized that he was special. All of his pieces were collected in his sister's home until he donated them to the Museo Picasso in 1970. These donations was a massive collection containing 213 oil paintings, 681 drawings, 17 sketchbooks, and many artifacts. But unlike Van Gogh, Picasso didn't share this self-criticism, this putting himself down and always thinking that he wasn't good enough. On the contrary, he was talented and he knew he was talented. This is a quote from Picasso when he's talking about his talent as a young boy. He says, "It is quite remarkable that I never did childish drawings. Never. Not even as a very small boy." So he doesn't get that, oh, my work is not good enough. I need to constantly be improving because I'm just not as good as I could be, like we see with Vincent van Gogh. He's just like, you know what? I'm him. I am him. I'm that guy, okay? But despite his extraordinary talent, Picasso wasn't the only child to display such talent at a young age, but he was one of the few to actually have his family nurture his talent when he was so young. The schooling that he received allowed him to produce images of certain things very quickly, which led to his proficiency, his ability to produce so many works so quickly. The training also gave him confidence. His family moved to Corona, where he went to a normal secondary school. But in 1892, his family moved him to LaGuardia Art School, where his father was a professor. By 1895, he had taken courses in ornamental drawing, figure, copying plaster objects, and painting from nature. His education was very strict and exposed him to fundamental teaching techniques which he practiced over and over and over again. However, his training did have its disadvantages. The rigorous formal training often squashed out the spontaneous instincts of an artist. Methods involving unrestrained self-expression were harshly discouraged, and so he rebelled by drawing dramatic caricatures of his family and friends. And so this provided a pressure release valve from his strict training. Despite his rigorous academic training, however, he never lost his creative imagination, and he remained fond of caricatures throughout his life. Students were, however, not required to paint what the professor told them to paint all the time. Free work was also a part of their training, and free work is when students get to go out and choose their own subjects to paint. They were encouraged to do this because art teachers at the time thought that free work would encourage an artist's ability to solve complex problems. They were required to carry a sketchbook with them at all times. And Picasso's parents gave him his first album in 1894, and he filled this album so fast that they had to give him another one later that same year. They became the first of many throughout his lifetime. Picasso's father was relentless in pushing him to be great. He wanted his son to paint history and figure paintings because these genres were valued more highly by art critics at the time than other styles. And so in rebellion, instead, Picasso painted portraits whenever he could find free time. In defiance to his father's oppressive influence, his father was often the subject of very unflattering portraits that Picasso painted. During this period of time, his father prompted him to create two paintings, the First Communion, which we discussed a little bit earlier, and a painting called Science and Charity, produced in 1896 and 1897, respectively. And in Science and Charity, his father was actually the model that sat to be painted for that piece. And his father was very connected in the art world. And so he not only encouraged him to practice, but he influenced how his paintings were received. Whenever Picasso was going to release a painting, his father would call newspapers and critics to alter the public perception of his work. And so Picasso's entire education took place under his father's influence. His father never allowed him to be educated in any schools where he did not teach or work. There was literally, at the beginning of his childhood, nowhere that he could escape his father's influence. And his father deliberately steered his training. And so you get this picture that starts to emerge of this sort of Joe Jackson figure. His father meticulously pulls the strings behind the scenes, controlling every way in which his son is trained, his son releases work, the genre that he's allowed to do, the schools that he goes to, and the way in which his work is received by art critics and reporters and newspapers. And so you get this picture of what would today be called an industry plant, because it's a carefully manipulated product created to be a commodity and controlled by another person. Many of his father's tactics, inspired as they were actually considered outdated and made obsolete by more modern artistic practices that were used in Europe. The practices in Spain, where Picasso was from, were considered a little bit antiquated, and Picasso always wanted to be on the cutting edge of his work. And so his artistic development during his childhood was like a train that was ultimately, inevitably destined to hit a brick wall. And we'll talk a little bit more about what happened when he finally hits this breaking point in our next video on this series. So make sure you tune in to watch part 2. So, the Spanish I'm going to be teaching you today is Déjame ser yo mismo. Déjame ser yo mismo. And what that means is, let me be myself. If you like this video or you learned something new, drop a like down below. If you'd like to support this work that I do, there'll be a link to the Cashapp in the description box. And if you have a topic that you'd like to see me cover, leave a comment down below. We'll see you next time.